Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 6 of my Legend of the Galactic Heroes episode by episode review and analysis. Today we're going to be looking at episode 6. One thing I want to say, and you maybe have already noticed it, is that the audio quality on my voice is not as good as I would like it to be. I'm working on that. But having some difficulty, and I mostly just wanted to get an episode out already because you guys have waited long enough, I think. But hopefully next week's episode will be much better and you won't be hearing my PC in the background. For example, you might be hearing the fan spinning. Anyway, let's get to it, shall we? We begin with a more in-depth look at the Iseralon Fortress, the attempted capture of which was the primary focus of the battle in the first movie we watched, Overture to a New War. To review, Iseralon is a space fortress that has been constructed on the only navigable corridor that forms the border between the Free Planets Alliance and the Galactic Empire. Its positioning prevents the Empire from being invaded by Alliance forces, and its strategic value has resulted in several Alliance attempts to take the fortress, 11 of which have ended in bloody failure. The fortress itself actually has two commanders. The literal fortress itself is commanded by Admiral Thomas von Stockhausen, while the fleet that is permanently stationed there is commanded by Admiral Hans Dietrich von Secht. The two men hate each other and spend as much time bickering and fighting for glory as they do actually fending off Alliance incursions. Of course, we cannot discuss Iseralon without mentioning its ultimate weapon, the Thor Hammer. The Thor Hammer is the cannon the fortress can fire that can single-handedly destroy enormous sections of enemy fleets. The capture of the fortress is the first assignment of Yang Wenli as the 13th Fleet Commander of the Alliance. Now, let's swing back to Hyzenopolis, where Yang is oversleeping his own fleet's formation ceremony. At the ceremony itself, we see Chairman Job Trunnitt giving a characteristically patriotic speech about how this new fleet is the new elite military force of the Free Planets Alliance due to its combination of elite veterans and bright new soldiers, which the fleet itself knows is just a nice way of saying that they cobbled up those who survived the disastrous Battle of Astate and the newest crop of rookies. However, once Yang does arrive, he quickly gets on his men and women's good side, not by appealing to tired patriotic slogans, but by reminding them in a pithy speech that if they die, they can't enjoy the good things in life. So, let's work together to not get killed. Afterwards, Yang is having lunch with his friend Admiral Alexander Kazunul when a little scuffle breaks out in the restaurant they are dining in. This is our introduction to Colonel Walter von Schenkop, commander of the Rosenritter, aka the Knights of the Rose. I'll talk more later about who the Rosenritter are, but for now, we see that they get into an argument with some officers who serve under Job Trunnitt directly, who were harassing a waitress. Afterward, Yang asks Kazunul for some specific supplies, those being a captured Imperial ship, 200 Imperial uniforms, and for the Rosenritter to be placed under his command. Back on Odin, Reinhardt is informed by Kerchiais, who got the information from Faison, of course, that Yang will be leading a fleet to capture Iseralon. So we see that Reinhardt is keeping tabs on Yang. Back in Hyzenopolis, there is now only one day to go before the fleet leaves, and Fleet Commander Yang is very busy getting ready. As such, he has requested a brilliant aid to help him, a request that Admiral Kazunul has been able to complete. So, we meet Yang's new aide, the Salutatorian of the Officer School Class of 794, formerly assigned to information analysis, and coming with the personal recommendation of no less a person than the Chief of Staff of the Free Planets Alliance Fleet, Dwight Greenhill. It is Lieutenant Junior Grade Frederica Greenhill, Dwight Greenhill's daughter. On April 27th of space year 796, Yang and his fleet embarked to take Iseralon Fortress, with his young ward Julian seeing them off. And as they leave, we see a conversation between the previously mentioned Chief of Staff Greenhill and the Fleet Admiral Sidney Sitolet. Greenhill is worried that Citolette will be forced out if Yang's mission fails, but Citolette thinks that he is going to be forced to retire soon anyway due to the recent Alliance military defeats. This would directly lead to an increase in the personal power of Job Trunit. The Yang fleet sets out for the Volgun system as the Free Planets Alliance theme plays, although some of Yang's soldiers have misgivings about their new commander. Sometime later, Yang holds a council to make his plans for the capture of Acirilon Fortress. His team is made up of Commodore Fisher, who is in charge of the 13th Fleet's deployments, as well as Admirals Patorichev and Murai. Yang sees it as an impossible task to take the fortress from without, so instead they will need to infiltrate the base. He is assigning this task to the Rosenritter, despite the misgivings of Rear Admiral Patriochev. You see, the Rosenritter are made up exclusively of Imperial citizens who have fled, or the children of the same. There were 12 commanders of the Rosenritter before Chenkov. 4 of them have died in battle, and 2 lived long enough to retire. But the other 6 betrayed the Free Planets Alliance and returned to the Empire. There are also rumors that Chenkov is going to turn traitor as well, but Yang has complete trust in him. Yang also reveals that he intends to retire if their fleet takes the fortress. The Alliance would be in a strong position, and he could retire without guilt, having ensured a peaceful universe for Julian to grow up in. He isn't naive enough to think peace will be permanent, but he thinks a couple decades of peace could be possible. In the evening, Lieutenant Greenhill brings some brandy for Wenli, and we finally get the details on Yang's title of the Hero of El Facil. 7 years ago, when Yang himself was a lieutenant junior grade, the planet El Facil was about to fall to advancing Imperial forces. As it turns out, Frederica was on El Facil with her mother at the time, and so she witnessed Yang taking charge of the situation and got millions of people evacuated from the planet before it fell. During this, she brought him some coffee so he wouldn't choke on a sandwich, to which he rudely said she should have brought him tea instead since he hates coffee. Frederica is very amused at Yang's lack of memory of those details, and while the scene is played for laughs, it does show Frederica's exceptional memory in action. It's now May 13th, and the 13th Fleet starts to enter the corridor and jam the fortress's communication signals. As a sidebar, it is at this moment that we start to hear the opening to Gustav Mahler's Second Symphony, known as Resurrection. Now, obviously this entire series is filled with incredible musical cues from Mahler and Schubert and many more, but as of right now, I'm not entirely sure how to incorporate talking about it into the reviews. These reviews are going to be long enough without me breaking down the specific musical cues for every episode, so I might just talk about the music in separate videos every half season or so. Or maybe I could do a music moment of the week, but the problem then is that a lot of these tracks are copyrighted, at least the performances of them are, so that could also prove to be difficult. Let me know what you want me to do in the comments. Back to the action. Stockhausen and Sect are beginning to bicker when they receive a radio call from an Imperial ship asking for aid as they flee Alliance territory. Sect is about to launch the fleet to aid them when our favorite captain with cyborg eyes, that being Paul von Oberstein, interjects. You'll remember that in an earlier episode after his conversation with Kerchies, he said that he was being transferred to Acirilon. Oberstein advises caution in the case of a trap, but Sect takes offense at this, saying they would obviously win against any enemy forces anyway, so the Fortress fleet launches. Shortly after they leave, communication is cut off from the fleet, and the Fortress gets a signal from the Imperial ship fleeing again. The episode ends as Colonel Chenkov and his Rosenritter board the Fortress disguised as Imperials, and the credits begin to roll because we simply do not have time for the ending song. Well, I did say last time that we were going to have quite a lot to cover in this episode, and we did, and the battle for the fortress has technically not even begun yet. Now, there are 2 things I mainly want to focus on today in terms of analysis, the first being the Rosenritter and then Yang Wenli's flagship. First, the Rosenritter. To review, the Rosenritter are a force made up entirely of former Galactic Empire citizens or the children of the same. While this may initially seem like an unusual fighting force to have, groups of people joining the military forces of another nation have existed for thousands of years. Of course, there are some interesting examples in history of individuals joining up with other armies, voluntary or otherwise. For example, American Joseph Beyrel was probably the only man in history to have been a member of both the United States and Red Armies after he ended up in a Soviet tank battalion following his escape from a POW camp in World War II. But we are talking about a force made up of thousands of men, not individuals, when we talk about the Rosenritter. So soldiers like Beyrel were perhaps not the inspiration for the Rosenritter. There are also cases of foreign units relatively spontaneously swapping sides in war. For example, the St. Patrick's Battalion, or San Patricios, during the U.S. War with Mexico, were made up of immigrants. This battalion was mostly made up of Irishmen, but also Germans, French, Canadians, and many other nationalities, their Catholicism being their common bond. This battalion would defect to the Mexican side of the war, and their existence was even officially covered up for decades by the U.S. Army to prevent future desertions. But again, this does not seem to fit the Rosenritter. They are not a rogue Imperial combat force that defected to the Alliance. They are instead a dedicated unit of non-native soldiers within the Free Planets Alliance that has existed for decades. The most famous example of this particular phenomenon would probably be the French Foreign Legion, which has existed since 1831 and is made up exclusively of non-French peoples who want to serve France. It could probably be a possible inspiration for the Rosenritter, since the Legion have an exaggerated reputation for being filled with criminals trying to start a new life. There are also the Gurkhas of Nepal, who have served in the army of the United Kingdom for over 200 years now. They are seen by many as the bravest of all the British Army, despite not being from the home island, in the same way that the Rosenritter are seen as the Alliance's most effective ground combat force. And of course, we cannot talk about the Gurkhas without talking about the famous joke that a reporter was witness to a unit of Gurkhas during World War II being asked if they would be willing to jump behind enemy lines to fight the Nazis, and only half the unit volunteered. When the reporter asked later, he found out that the reason that only half the unit volunteered to jump into Germany was because they didn't know they were going to be getting parachutes. But I think that there are a couple of other historical examples that perhaps fit the Rosenritter's mold better. Examples that I will talk about in episode 7. So let's leave them behind for now, and instead talk about the flagship of the 13th Fleet, Yang's ship Hyperion. Well, very quickly, what is a flagship? Well, literally, it is the ship used by the commander of the fleet. It is symbolically the best version of the fleet, and so that is often why outside of the context of a navy, when you hear something is the flagship, it's saying that it is the best version or best example for others to follow of that thing. The name of the 13th Fleet's flagship, piloted by Yang Wenli, is Hyperion. Now, Hyperion is a name, like many others in the Free Planets Alliance, that has roots in ancient Greece. Hyperion was a mythological titan whose family tree was a bit different from the norm, as is to be expected of Greek mythology. His parents were Uranus, the primordial embodiment of the sky, and Gaia, the primordial embodiment of the earth, who, by the way, was also his grandmother, because she was Uranus's mother. The Habsburgs have nothing on Greek deities. Anyway, Hyperion was the older brother of Kronos and aided him and his mother Gaia in overthrowing their father/half-brother/husband Uranus. After that, Hyperion mostly disappears from our records, but the little we do know has great relevance to our story today. Hyperion's wife, or at least his lover, was his older sister Theia, with whom he had 3 children. Their son Helios was the eldest and was god/personification of the sun. Their first daughter Selene, the goddess and personification of the moon. And finally their second daughter Eos, who was the goddess and personification of the dawn. In other words, he is the father of all light in the sky, or the Titan of heavenly light, as he is usually called. This is sometimes also translated as him being the god which wisdom comes from. This is certainly a weighty and extremely complimentary name that the Free Planets Alliance has given to their golden boy Yang's ship, no doubt inspired by his previously displayed mind for battles. There are also a pair of epic poems by John Keats called Hyperion, or that at least relate to him, but for the sake of brevity and because it is not currently relevant, we will return to those poems in a future episode. But there's one more thing I want to mention about this flagship Hyperion, and for this we have to move from ancient Greece and 19th century England to the Roman Empire of the 360s AD. The emperor was being ruled by Julian Constantinian, but better known to history as Julian the Apostate for his religious beliefs. Julian had risen to the height of the Roman world due to his military accomplishment. However, he also aimed at reforming the empire, and a core tenet of that reform was his belief in the Neoplatonic branch of Hellenism, which he also planned to reform. He had the deities of Hellenism formally categorized and reserved a special name for Hyperion. Hyperion was more than a titan. Hyperion was, for Julian, he who was above all. Thank you very much for watching today's episode, and a special thanks to those of you who will go down to the link below and sign up to be a Patreon and be credited at the end of videos like this from now on. I will see you all next time in episode 7 of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. We will see how this attempt to swing the balance of power in the war between the Alliance and Empire goes. Please be sure to like and subscribe to the video if you did enjoy it, and I will see you next time.